Hey everybody, and welcome to the 101st Disney Q&A. If you're new to the series and you're starting at 101, this is the series in which you all send me your Disney questions, whether it's about the parks, the history, the company, the movies, and I try to give you answers to the best of my ability. I have a bunch of great questions here today, so I'm just going to dive right in. Our first question comes from Zatstar, who asks, if you could own one thing from the parks, new or old, what would it be? This was a surprisingly tough question for me. I had to sit down and really think about this because I didn't want anything, that would be out of place on its own, or I didn't want to pick anything that was too big that's not going to fit in my apartment. Obviously, it can't be a ride. I immediately wrote off the idea of any sort of animatronic or figure because I feel like that'd just be creepy to have in my apartment. And ultimately what I settled on was I think I would be able to squeeze into this apartment, and I would love to have the model city of Progress City from the Tomorrowland Transit Authority that you sort of go through after you look at Magic Kingdom. I think that would be really awesome. That's one of those things where I would just love to take time to focus on it and study it because, on the ride itself, you just sort of drive right by it. I can put that in my living room. Our next question comes from the Pickled Oranges, who asks, with all the huge contributions John Lasseter has brought to the parks, what do you think would have happened if he never brought these ideas to the table? And what do you think would be in these ride places? Interesting question. I always love playing what if. This one's, I think, a little broad because it's tough. It's well, what would be there if John Lasseter didn't, contribute everything that he's done to the company? And, I think some people actually think that out of everybody in, the history of the company since Walt's passing, he's probably the closest to embodying what Walt did. So that's a really tough question. I mean, the answer ultimately, I don't know, and I don't think anybody's going to know. Certainly, I guess I could see them focusing more on rehashing older content rather than creating new stuff, since I think John Lasseter played such an important part into, bringing a lot of Pixar, and I think Pixar itself is responsible after the 90s, sort of Disney renaissance of reinvigorating Disney with some original content. So I don't know, maybe we would see more rides based on older properties. Maybe we'd see more stuff from the 90s, more Aladdin stuff, and I almost said Sleeping Beauty, Little Mermaid and Hercules and that era maybe, and less of, Toy Story and everything Pixar brought to the table. I don't know. That's a tough question, but it's definitely an interesting one to think about. Our next question comes from Mr. Sweeney Todd, who asks, Disney just announced that they're closing Motors Action in Hollywood Studios. What do you think of this closure, and what do you think of the backlash Disney is getting for removing these rides for Star Wars Land and Toy Story Land before people have even had a chance to experience it? So yeah, they announced that they're closing Lights, Motors, Actions this year. It's clearly because they're clearing up space for either Star Wars Land or Toy Story Land, or a little bit of both. I think it's great. I'm super excited for Star Wars Land. I'm pretty excited for Toy Story Land. I'm super excited for new things. And in regards to the backlash, it's one of those things, damned if you do, damned if you don't. Disney always gets backlash when something closes. It doesn't matter what it is. The Maelstrom closed and there was backlash. And that ride is, in my opinion, was long overdue for being closed down and replaced with something else. I think Disney fans just love what they love and what they grow up with, and they don't like the idea of losing it to something that they don't know anything about. And so they get angry, and there's that backlash. And I think it's a shame, because I think the parks were built on this foundation that Walt wanted these parks to always be changing and always evolving. And to that extent, Lights, Motors, Action premiered in 2005. So by the time it's closing, it will have been an 11-year run for this show. So yeah, surely there are going to be people who never had the chance to see it, but you can never let that be an excuse to keep something open longer than it should be around. With that logic, we would have World of Motion still, because there are people who's never had the chance to ride World of Motion, and then we never would have gotten Test Track to enjoy. That's an easy recipe for really missing out on some cool new stuff. So, I mean, as tough as it might sound for somebody who's never gotten to see it, I think the answer is just you had 11 years, and if you didn't see it in 11 years, maybe you never were going to see it, or you can't hold back progress of these parks just because somebody might not have seen something. And, you know, that includes to myself. There are things in the parks I never got to experience because I never got to see it by the time it closed down. That's just sort of how it goes. But the flip side of that is you get to experience something new and exciting. Our next question comes from RKH270, who says, I know rides don't really need movies, but say you had to come up with a movie for Expedition Everest. What would it be like, and what would the plot be? As somebody who's trying to get a little bit back into writing for film, I'd say I definitely don't have the energy or talent to come up with a full plot here. But I will say I would think if they were to ever do an Expedition Everest movie, just the idea that I think it would be based around the idea of finding the Yeti and the fact that Yetis don't exist, it would have to be a little more fantastical, and I think that would mean for a more lighthearted adventure film, and I hope we see some more of those. You know, I think today's trend in cinema is that everything has to be grounded and gritty and epic, and, you know, I would almost see any other studio trying to do that of an Expedition Everest movie where the stakes are high and, you know, people are dying left and right, but why not do something a little more lighthearted? Tomorrowland really strikes me as a sort of Disney's more optimistic approach to science fiction films. I would think it would be something in tone similar to that for an Expedition Everest movie. And, you know, you'd get a great cast of characters because it'd be one of those movies where it's actually less about the Yeti and the mountain and more about the people going up it. And because there's not a lot of opportunity there for external problems outside of weather, you'd have to have a really good cast and you'd have to have a really good story about these characters and their relationships. So that's what I would think it would be about. And then, of course, fun. You know, it'd be fun because it would have, I mean, a movie you're trying to find the Yeti on Everest, that would totally be fun. Our next question comes from the Franchise 50, who says, one of my dream jobs is to be a Walt Disney Imagineer, but I'm not the best artist or designer. I'm more of the management type. I've read that Imagineering takes drawing skills to make it in the business. My question is, do you know anything about the types of Imagineers that would involve less drawing and designing, but still is involved with planning and coming up with the projects? Unfortunately, I don't know a whole lot. I don't know any Imagineers personally. What I can tell you is this. Imagineering is a very catch-all term. These are the people behind putting together an attraction. And that doesn't just mean the people designing it visually or writing the script. But yeah, it's a big project and that requires a lot of project management. So absolutely there are going to be roles in Imagineering that aren't just drawing and designing. That said, I think with any sort of project like that, especially when it comes to, like, you know, related arts, films, video games, stuff like that, it benefits from having a project manager who used to do that craft, whether it's drawing or architecture or video game design or whatever the project is, because then they can know from experience what they can expect from people, what they can't, what timelines are realistic. So I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of project managers in Imagineering come from backgrounds of design and architecture. But ultimately, everything I've always ever heard about Imagineering is that there is no straight path to becoming an Imagineer. They come from all sorts of disciplines and trades, and so that there's always going to sort of be that opportunity. I think if you want more resources on that, you know, obviously there are books about art and design and Imagineering, sure, but I know Lou Mongello of the WDW Radio podcast does a lot of interviews with Imagineers, and I know it's a topic he brings up very often with them, is like, how did you become one? So I think that's an interesting way of looking into it. I think the general takeaway that I've always heard, and maybe this isn't true, is don't sit down and go, okay, I'm going to be an Imagineer. What do I have to do to be an Imagineer? Sit down and go, okay, what am I going to do? What do I like to do? Let me be really good at it. And then let me find that opening within Imagineering, because that's what they're going to look for, right? They're not going to look for somebody who's just like young and bright-eyed and who doesn't know anything about what they're doing. They're going to look for people who are good at it. So it's like sort of, you know, you just gotta master that trade and then move into Imagineering, as opposed to, I think, you know, being like an intern and not knowing anything. But I could be wrong. Like I said, I don't know any Imagineers. I've never tried to get into it. So, you know, take everything I say with a grain of salt. But best of luck to you, because it looks like a really fun career path. Our next question comes from X Whiteout Flame, who says, I love Song of the South. Do you think Disney will make another ride about it other than Splash Mountain? Also, if you could change the name of Splash Mountain, what would it be? To answer your first question, because I think it's a simple answer, no. I don't think you'll ever see another ride based on that movie. I don't think you'll ever see the movie re-released. I don't think you'll ever see it really acknowledged from the Disney company. And simply the fact for that is because it has a reputation of being a racist movie. Now, that said, Jim Korkis has a book called Who's Afraid of Song of the South that makes the argument that it's not a racist movie. I think the truth, as usual, lies somewhere in the middle, which is to say it's a pretty racially insensitive movie. And I don't think Disney wants to touch that with a 10-foot stick. I think they'd rather people forget the movie ever existed, for better or for worse. And I think you have to consider that as a company, financially, they don't need to acknowledge it ever existed. They have Pixar, they have Star Wars, they have Marvel, they have all of their own properties. They have tons of their own classic and modern animated films. So I think in the big picture, there's not a lot of need for Song of the South. So why risk it by bringing it up or making a ride based upon it? As for what I would rename Splash Mountain, I think something Briar Patch related, maybe. I like the idea of it being a mountain. I don't know. For as silly as the history of the name of Splash Mountain is, I kind of like the name. I don't know if I'd really want to change it at all. And our last question this week comes from Mr. Sweeney Todd 01. Mr. Sweeney Todd says, they just announced Emily Blunt might play Mary Poppins in the Mary Poppins sequel. What are your thoughts on the sequel, seeing as Walt said he never wanted a Mary Poppins sequel made because it was unoriginal and he couldn't top Mary with another Mary? I actually like the idea of Emily Blunt as Mary Poppins. I remember having this conversation with some friends a couple of months ago where we were talking about who would play whom, and I think she could pull off a good Mary Poppins. Although I've never seen her in a movie where she's like happy-go-lucky. I've always seen her in movies where it's like she's pretty serious and like gritty. So I don't know if she could pull it off. Probably. She seems like a very talented actress. As for how I feel about a sequel, Walt was very anti-sequel in general. His famous saying is, you can't top pigs with pigs. And that was because the Three Little Pigs did really popular. People were expecting another one, and he didn't want to do one because he thought it was unoriginal. And there is an argument to be had for that. But there is also an argument to be had that you don't have to have that stance. He was afraid of falling back too much on sequels and remakes and depending too much on that to the point where you're not innovating. And I think Disney today shows that you don't have to be one or the other. Disney has sequels, right? We're getting another Cars. We're getting another Toy Story. We're going to get another Star Wars and maybe another Indiana Jones. Yet at the same time, we're getting Moana. We're getting Zootopia. We got the original Frozen. We get new stuff along with these sequels. And so I think as long as you keep a balance, there's nothing wrong with it. Walt and the history of Mary Poppins specifically, obviously very shaky, especially with P.L. Travers. And so it gets a little messier there. That said, time has changed. It's been decades. Let's give it a shot. I'm always for another movie, whether it's a remake or a reboot or a sequel, because I figure the worst case scenario is it's a bad movie and I never watch it again and I go back to watching the good ones. Best case scenario, you've got another great movie to enjoy, and maybe this newer movie that's enjoyable gets people to check out the originals. So for that reason, I think I'm all for it. I mean, personally, for instance, I remember when Saving Mr. Banks came out, not that I hadn't seen Mary Poppins before, but it inspired me to go rewatch Mary Poppins. And that was great, because that movie, if it wasn't made, and it wasn't a sequel, but, it was related, if it wasn't made, I probably wouldn't have seen Mary Poppins since I was a little kid. And so, for reasons of that, I'm all for it. Anyway, bunch of great questions this week, a lot of good thinkers. I'd love to hear what you guys would want from the parks to put in your house or your bedroom or your apartment or wherever. Let me know in the comments below. If you have a question you'd like me to answer, feel free to leave it in the comments below as well, or you can ask me on Twitter. I'm @RobPlays. If you want more of these, or you want to check out the other 100 Q&As, or you want to see some of my old retro Disney vlogs or any of my other Disney videos, all you have to do is hit that subscribe button. I want to thank you all for watching. Whatever you're doing this week, make the most of it because it makes it that much better. And I hope to see you all next time for the next Disney Q&A. Bye, everybody.